Okay, so if I can have everybody gather up over here. I'm going to talk just briefly out here, but I'm not going to make you stand in the sun for too long. To give some of the historical context, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this story, but for those of you who perhaps aren't, one of the reasons that this particular location was chosen for a camp was because it was a large area of federally owned land that was potentially farmable. And the plan had always been that the Japanese Americans in the camps would grow their own food to help supplement their own supplies. But of course, if you have an area of land large enough to feed 10,000 people that is still in federal hands in the 1940s, there is probably a reason for that. At Heart Mountain, the reason was water. This area had not been irrigated yet. This is technically high desert where we are. So we don't get a lot of rainfall. Most of it is in the form of snow. And so this land has to be irrigated to be used for farms. So the Japanese Americans are actually the ones who completed the irrigation canals that are in use today out there. So what I often tell people is the farm fields you see out there, those fields that are up where the camp itself was, those are an artifact of this camp. That is part of Heart Mountain's legacy. The government had planned that at Heart Mountain they would produce up to 5 million tons of produce over the time that they were here. But in addition, when people first came to Heart Mountain, the nutritional quality of the food was very low. They were largely eating canned food, and often there was not enough of it. The not enough of it came from many issues, but one of them was mismanagement. They eventually got the food situation up to Army standards, but one of the assistant stewards who had been fired as part of this process went to the FBI and said, "Let me tell you all about the food hoarding that's going on at Heart Mountain." When he did not get the response he wanted from the FBI, he went to the Denver Post, who published a multi-week expose about how wasteful the food was at Heart Mountain and at how the people at Heart Mountain had warehouses of sugar in the middle of wartime rationing. This ultimately leads to the House Committee of Un-American Activities investigating the WRA and all of the camps. This is the Diaz Committee. This is where you get the accusations of they are being fed steak dinners every night. Well, ultimately, the Diaz Committee's report was pretty toothless. All of their wild accusations got disproven. But those rumors continued to stick around in the local community, but also winter of 1942 to 1943, people were genuinely afraid that as a result of these rumors, their food supplies would be cut off entirely. So in addition to the expectation that they were going to need to farm and the desire to have better nutrition and to have familiar foods, you had a genuine fear that they might be left to fend for themselves, basically. So that was part of the urgency behind the farms. They were incredibly successful farmers. They didn't actually get to those 5 million tons of food, but they got darned close. But of course, if you're producing a lot of food, you have to have some place to keep it. And that's where the root cellars come in. As you walk into the cellar, I want you to just focus on the sensory experience as you come in. Particularly pay attention to what you feel and what you smell. So, just a quick sense of the size of this cellar. Going from the entrance down to the far end, it's 300 feet long, and it's 35 feet wide. This center area where we are standing now, this was where the trucks were. So the building was set up so that you could drive a truck in and just go straight through, drop your cargo off, and out the other end. In fact, that wall that we just came through where the door is, we installed that about 1.5 years ago to help with weather control down here. Because one of the most important things about a root cellar is that it has to have good ventilation and it has to be dry. As you all came in here, you probably noticed it's a lot cooler down here, which is one of the reasons I wanted to get us down here quickly, because I didn't like standing in the sun any more than you. A properly maintained root cellar with the proper insulation and being used for its intended purpose stays around 40 to 50 degrees year-round, regardless of outside temperature. This is basically a geothermal form of air conditioning and heating, temperature control. There is so much earth around this building that it's cushioning the effect of seasonal temperatures. You'll see a similar effect in natural caves, where it can be very cold in the summer, but when the winter comes, it never actually goes to freezing. So the purpose of this is pretty much the same as a pantry. This is essentially a gigantic pantry for 10,000 people. It's keeping a very stable temperature, and that means that you can store particularly slightly hardier produce. So if you think about what goes into your pantry or your basement at home, you know, onions, potatoes, radishes, plants that are usually root vegetables. It's called a root cellar for that reason, not because it's underground. And that's where you store them, and they will keep for a very long time under these conditions. You have about 30,000 square feet of storage space in here. And there were 2 of these cellars. There were 2. This one remains standing. There's another one off to that side that was collapsed in the 1960s for safety reasons. It had deteriorated a little too fast and wasn't safe for people to go in. If you look at a satellite photograph, you can see the outline of it in bright green shrubbery because of that sunken earth. We are preserving that space as an archaeological site. This space, it was originally the Jolovich?
Jolovich, you got it?
Jolovich. The Jolovich family. She had to correct my pronunciation. I'd only ever seen it written. So the Jolovich family received it after the camp closed. They were one of the homesteading families. And then they donated it to the Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation. Now, one of the tricks is that while they were using it, they kept it to store potatoes, but they also had a potato washing facility in here. And remember me mentioning that root cellars have to stay dry? The wood for this construction came from the Shoshone National Forest. The WRA was able to get a lumber mill, and they produced the wood, but I mean, you can see there's bark on this wood. It has not been treated. It is vulnerable to rot. So if you get moisture down here, the moisture gets trapped. And for an understanding of what happened, the area over here with the lights on it, we did some experimental restoration here in 2018. So this is the original dimensions of the cellar. Where I am standing, right there, is where that project stopped. So you can see what has happened to the root cellar over the years. It has dropped down substantially. And this is why we warn people to be very careful in here. In addition, actually that entryway down there, that first section with the lower ceiling, that was added by the Jolovich family. It was not there originally, and it lowered the headspace enough that they actually had to dig the floor out. So you can see there's kind of a dip in the ground right there. We're going to have to fill that in when we get around to restoring this space. For a number of reasons. For one, it's not historic, and for number 2, when we get our winter snow melts, that turns into a lake. We are in the process of working on the restoration. Our plans had actually been to start construction this summer. but with the inflation and the labor limitations that we are currently dealing with, plans are a bit akimbo at the moment, so we're working on it. We are going to get something done this summer. I mean, I'm going to be really, really annoyed if we don't. We also have, but once it's done, we have plans for an exhibit that we'll install in here. So this front area is going to basically focus on the sensory experience of walking into this cellar, the smell of the dirt and the cool air. There's going to be a raised walkway for everyone to move on so that we don't have people tripping on the very uneven ground. And then the walkway is going to continue up to about the 1/3 to half the way through. And then there's going to be basically a holographic display. So an audiovisual display projected onto screens talking about the actual story of the cellar itself. So, okay, I'm going to have you come in. And what I'm going to ask is that sort of as you come around, stay kind of to the right-hand side. And as you reach the end, loop around and then come back on the other side. And that way nobody's going to walk into each other. Yeah. Also, just to repeat, watch your footing. It is uneven. There are things you can trip on down here. Okay. So this is the stop point. That's a Jolovich truck. It's the Jolovich car, actually.
Okay, will you be removing it?
We don't want to.
Okay.
We may not incorporate it into our interpretation. We had talked about maybe doing that, but we're not going to get rid of it, I don't think. And for those of you who are wondering, yes, that is a car back there. The story that I have heard is that the grandson of the Jolovich family wanted to fix it up for drag racing. And it sat in the driveway for a couple of years until Grandpa Jolovich got really annoyed and drove it down here, and it has been here ever since.
What year this was built?
So this particular cellar, I believe construction was finished in 1943, relatively early.
In what time of year?
I believe it was finished in the summer. So once they got going on it, it was fairly rapid.
It was not built by Army Corps of Engineers.
No, it was built by the incarcerated Japanese Americans. They are also the ones who did the design work.
Oh my God.
And they are the ones who gathered the lumber.
Because it had a natural
Nope.
shape?
Nope. This site was likely chosen, and I haven't seen the official rationale. It's close to the railroad, and it's close to the warehouses, so this was already a storage district.